सो हेलो फ्रेंड्स, वेलकम बैक टू आवर चैनल मटेरियलाइज PSIR। और आज हम ये 2025 का क्या कहते हैं क्वेश्चन डिस्कस करेंगे। ठीक है, और इससे अपन डिकोड करेंगे कि कैसे आंसर करना है, कैसे ब्रेनस्टॉर्म करना है, और क्या कहते हैं एक ओवरऑल फॉर्मेट क्या होगा और कंटेंट क्या होगा इस क्वेश्चन का। और बिफोर मूविंग ऑन टू दैट, प्लीज़ इफ़ यू लाइक माई कंटेंट प्लीज़ ज्वाइन मी ऑन माई टेलीग्राम। ठीक है, जिसका लिंक इस वीडियो के नीचे मिल जाएगा। वहाँ पे मैं ऐसे कंटेंट और भी रेलेवेंट कंटेंट जो करंट अफेयर्स है, जो PSIR से रेलेवेंट है, वो मैं शेयर करता रहता हूँ। ठीक है, सो लेट्स मूव ऑन टू द क्वेश्चन। जैसे क्वेश्चन आप देख सकते हैं 2025 का, द वर्ल्ड करंटली हैज़ बीन इन द थेरोज ऑफ ट्विन प्रोसेस ऑफ डेमोक्रेटिक बैकस्लाइडिंग एंड डेमोक्रेटिक बैकलैश। हाउ वुड यू एक्सप्लेन दिस पैराडॉक्स? सो बिफोर जब भी आपके सामने ऐसा क्वेश्चन आता है ना, व्हाट यू हैव टू डू इज़ दैट, जैसे कि दो की टर्म्स है कि एक तो है बैक स्लाइडिंग एंड एक है बैक क्लैश। ठीक है, तो यू हैव टू थिंक इन टर्म्स ऑफ एग्जाम्पल्स. You have to solve this question in terms of examples. You have to consider the examples of where the democracy is backsliding and where there are backlashes with regard to this backsliding. ठीक है, फिर उस हिसाब से यू हैव टू ओपन अप द क्वेश्चन। फॉर एग्जांपल, जैसे कि यहाँ पे जब अपन क्वेश्चन सॉल्व शुरू करेंगे, मैंने 2025 मेंस में ये वाला क्वेश्चन अटेम्प्ट करा था, एंड दिस इज दिस इज हाउ आई डिड इट। ठीक है, फॉर एग्जांपल जैसे इंट्रो लिखेंगे, इंट्रो कोई भी क्वेश्चन होगा, इंट्रो शुरू करेंगे, बेसिक इंट्रो, दैट डेमोक्रेसी इज गवर्नमेंट बाय द पीपल, of the people and for the people. This is your basic introduction. Then you connect it that however recently we are witnessing a rise in democracy paradox. Now what is this paradox? For those of you who don't know, democratic paradox is when any political leader or party is popularly elected and then use his or her power to capture state institutions for Machiavellian ends. And what are Machiavellian ends is more power. See, this is democratic paradox, more power. ठीक है, and so this is how I started my question, my answer. I gave a basic introduction, then connected to democracy paradox, and how this paradox, what is this paradox, is that how people get popularly elected using democratic principles like elections, and then when they come into power, they use the state institutions or capture the state institutions for their Machiavellian ends to gain more power. And then I gave an example, जो प्राइम डेमोक्रेटिक पैराडॉक्स का एग्जाम्पल था। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, आई रोट एडोल्फ हिटलर used parliamentary democracy to come into power. Then he, using this power and capturing state institutions, converted this parliamentary democracy into a fascist state. Of course, this example is not relevant as a current affairs example, but this example in your introduction will give the examiner an idea that you know the demand of the question. You have understood the concept of democratic paradox. ठीक है, and then moving on, you say that democratic paradox is made up of two things. ठीक है, जिसमें अपन बताएंगे we will introduce backsliding and backlash. Where backsliding means how democracy is being eroded, and backlash is the reaction to this erosion. ठीक है, this is by political parties or leaders, and this is by citizens. Reaction is by citizens. Then moving on, Before moving on to the main content, you also have to, what I did was, after this portion, I briefly introduced what are values of democracy. Values of democracy. ठीक है, जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल क्या कहते हैं, व्हाट आर वैल्यूज, लाइक वन मैन वन वोट, इक्वालिटी, लिबर्टी, ठीक है, फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच. These are some of the values that are being backsliding, that are being eroded because of this democratic paradox. And now we have to open up, because this question is for 20 marker, you have 4 pages, so you can use one full page to introduce your concept with an example. Now you are left with 3 pages. Use these pages for your main content, backsliding, backlash, and maybe a way forward and conclusion in the third page, and open up this question with use of examples. Now I'm going to show you how we can do that by examples. For example, what are let's start with backsliding. Now we will open up the backsliding. Okay? Backsliding and erosion. Now, how democracy is being eroded by popular leaders or political party. For example, let's take how freedom of speech, a core principle of democracy, right, is being, how it is being eroded. For example, political parties or political leaders capture media. Media is a pillar of free speech, and then and when they capture media, they create yellow journalism. What is yellow journalism? Yellow journalism is a concept where media give biased news. For example, add an example. How I came to this idea is that I knew this example that in USA, Fox News generally favor Republican Party, and CNN generally favor Democrats. So the media is influencing the voter base. So of course the democracy uh, is being eroded. Why? Because free speech or free ideas are creating manufactured consent. Why? Because the media is biased. Again, what are another examples that that came to my mind was the curbing of civil society. How civil society is being curbed, or let's say controlled. Okay? For example, in USA you have Patriotic Act. So anyone who is dissenting against the government is being labeled as a terrorist or anti-national. So this is how the Patriotic Act is being used in USA. Again, in India, if we talk about India, currently you must have heard about FCRA amendments. So this is what FCRA amendments are controlling civil society, so that civil society or NGOs cannot raise or their criticism or dissent against government, because then government is going to use FCRA to stop their funding. Again, another example of democratic backsliding. Third, let's say equality. Equality is a prime principle, one of the core principles of democracy. How equality is being eroded. In USA, during US elections, Elon Musk heavily funded Donald Trump. All right. Now, why? Look at this. When the corporate giants are funding political leaders, this is what is creating is Marxist analysis. Now, analyze this from Marxist point of view. How democracy is being eroded, because Elon Musk is using his economic power to capture political power. All right. Again, democracy is being reduced, and then what is the overall effect of this? Is income inequality. Why? Because few rich people are controlling the political power and using this political power to gain more economic benefits. This will create what? Income equality. You can also quote, I quoted Oxford report. You can also quote Oxford report in this answer. How this income inequality is created when elite people, when economically rich people uses their economic power to influence political policies to gain more economic advantages. All right. Again, another point that we can think of is that how privacy and individuality is being eroded. Privacy and individuality is one of the core principles of liberty, which again is a core principle of democracy, right? And how it is being eroded. The rise of surveillance, surveillance, surveillance state. You can connect this to Bentham's panopticon. Panopticon. All right. And what are the examples? Now you have to think of the examples, right? What are the examples for this? For example, you have Five Eyes Alliance. Five Eyes Alliance. All right. This is an intelligence gathering alliance between five countries, and intelligence, private intel is gathered for security purposes, but it also breaches privacy of the individual. Again, China is a prime example. There is no concept of privacy in China, no privacy, because China is always surveilling the personal data of its citizens. Again, what are another examples is facial recognition technology, right? So these things are creating a threat for individual personality, individual privacy. All right. Again, what are another features of democracy that are being violated? For example, take secularism, one of the core features of democracy, how it is being eroded as political parties or leaders mobilize voters on the basis of ethnicity, right? You can connect this to Paul Brass. Paul Brass also says that how political leadership uses ethnic identities to create tensions in the system to gain power. For example, if you see in Europe, you can see anti immigrants sentiments is being exploited. In USA, we saw Trump. Trump is being supported by who? White supremacists. All right. In India, we see the clash between Hindu and Muslims over what Ayodhya temple, things like this. So what happens because of this is that you can connect these points to Huntington's clash of civilization, right? These leaders are using ethnic identities to mobilize voter banks for their own power, and this in turn what creates it creates a clash of civilization as propounded by Huntington, and it creates tension in a democratic system. All right. तो इस सब क्या हो रहा है? देखो सेकुलरिज्म खतरे में पड़ रही कि नहीं पड़ रही? तो इससे क्या हो रहा है? डेमोक्रेसी अगेन इरोड हो रहा है. नाउ अगेन दीज आर पॉइंट फॉर बैकस्लाइडिंग. अब द अनदर पार्ट इज क्या कहते हैं? बैकलैश. नाउ यू हैव टू आंसर दिस होल क्वेश्चन विद द यूज ऑफ एग्जाम्पल्स. ठीक है, मैंने भी ऐसे करा था. मैंने एग्जाम्पल सोचे थे, देन आई स्टार्टेड यूजिंग दोज एग्जाम्पल्स टू कनेक्ट टू द थ्योरी और मेजर इश्यूज इन द डेमोक्रेसी. ऑलराइट, बट फर्स्ट थिंक ऑफ द एग्जाम्पल्स. फॉर एग्जाम्पल कितने सारे जो मूवमेंट्स हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल ब्लैक लाइव्स मैटर मूवमेंट. ऑलराइट, इट वॉज अगेंस्ट वॉट? रेशियल discrimination, right? So you can connect it with how US politics in USA, Trump is being perceived as white supremacist. Why? Because white voters, white जो supremacists है, they support Trump, and it creates racial tension, and that led to what? Rise of Black Lives Movement. All right, Islamophobia. In West, a lot of political leaders and political parties, especially post 9/11, mobilized their voters on this Islamophobia, right? Because, and this is what it was creating aggression against मुस्लिम माइनॉरिटी मुस्लिम माइनॉरिटी ठीक है अगेन और भी जो बैकलैश है कहाँ से आ रहा है ठीक है थिंक ऑफ करंट एग्जांपल्स फॉर एग्जांपल जेन जी प्रोटेस्ट इन नेपाल ये क्यों हुए थे बिकॉज पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज और लीडर्स प्लस oligarchs were extremely wealthy and there was huge economic inequality. This led to what? Gen Z protests in Nepal, and this is what? Backlash. Alright, this is backlash. Again, think of another examples. For example, umbrella movement. I'm sure you would have heard of this movement. It happened in Hong Kong, somewhere around in 2019 or 20. This movement was against Chinese authoritarianism. Chinese authoritarianism by citizens. All right, for democracy. Okay? Because Chinese authoritarianism was harming the core principle of democracy, which is what? Republicanism. Right? Republicanism. It was harming it. So citizens started this umbrella movement. Again, Arab Spring. Okay? Arab Spring happened in Middle East, and what was the core demand of Arab Spring? Was to push for democracy in Middle East. Alright, so when you think of these examples, you know that these are the backlashes. Now you have to use these examples in your answer to create a more holistic and more practical answer. ठीक है? So instead of writing vague points, use these examples and build your argument in the backlash portion of this answer. Build your argument around these examples. कि कैसे हांगकांग में umbrella movement citizens ने शुरू करा था as a backlash against Chinese authoritarianism. कैसे Arab Spring, because in Middle East there is a lack of democracy and a lot of authoritarian leadership and authoritarian control. So the people in the Middle East started Arab Spring to call for the demands of democracy. Gen Z protests in Nepal use Black Lives Matter movement. Why? Because Black Lives Matter reflected the racial tensions and how the racial tensions are being exploited by political leadership to gain power, and this resulted in Black Lives Matter movement, where there was a core conflict between Trump supporters versus Biden supporters. All right. So you have to use these examples and build your answer around these examples, and this is how you solve a question like this, where you have to give two contrasting answers, one on backsliding and one on backlash. And again you can conclude it on a positive note, that again, no matter how democracy is being eroded, the citizens are more aware in the 21st century. Okay? And using social media, education, civil society, all right, and etc., to keep democracy alive. ठीक है? अगेन इसमें भी एग्जांपल दे दो. फॉर एग्जांपल क्या कहते हैं, जो ब्लैक लाइव्स मैटर का एग्जांपल है, इट वाज नॉट रिस्ट्रिक्टेड टू यूएसए, इट वाज अ वर्ल्ड वाइड सोशल कॉल. ऑलराइट, तो सोशल कॉल, भले ये सिर्फ यूएसए के अंदर इशू था, बट पूरे वर्ल्ड में आप इंस्टाग्राम पे देख सकते थे कि ब्लैक लाइव्स मैटर बहुत फेमस हुआ था. सो अगेन, दिस इज हाउ यू सॉल्व एंड दिस इज हाउ यू ब्रेक डाउन particular question by brainstorming examples, and then from examples you build your arguments around those examples. And this is how I solved this question in 2025 mains, and I secured 134 marks in it. So again guys, if you like my content, please like, share and subscribe my channel, on YouTube. And please, you can find the link below of the Telegram channel. You can join me here as well for more content. Thank you very much.